Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or The Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about 6 players that are skyrocketing up my rankings in 2024 fantasy football. But before we can talk about 6 players that are on the rise in my rankings right now, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, let's get into 6 players skyrocketing up my rankings in 2024 fantasy football. We begin with the first player that is skyrocketing up my rankings, and that is Garrett Wilson, wide receiver of the New York Jumbo Jets, aggregate ADP wide receiver 8. At pick number 12, the aggregate ADP is from ESPN, Sleeper, MFL, NFFC, and Fantrax. Underdog Fantasy ADP wide receiver 7 at pick 10.6. Now, every time I go on my phone or on my computer and navigate over to Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, anytime that the Jets are in the middle of doing their training camp, it just looks like a Garrett Wilson fan page, right? It's all these beat reporters getting down on their knees, giving the Gawk Gawk 9000 special to Garrett Wilson, because Garrett Wilson is going balls deep into the defense. It doesn't matter who is covering him, whether it's Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed, Garrett Wilson is making them look silly, and Aaron Rodgers looks incredibly good. Now, I am not someone who just reads into the beat reporters and take them as the fantasy football gospel, but when you keep reading things over and over about how dominant Garrett Wilson is looking in practice, to me, it is very telling that Garrett Wilson is going to absolutely explode this season. And even if Aaron Rodgers doesn't look like his old self, right, the back-to-back MVP of the NFL, as long as he is like 70% of that, which is miles ahead of Trevor Siemian and what Zach Wilson were last season, then Garrett Wilson is going to be in a scenario where he could end up as a top 5 wide receiver in all of fantasy football. This is a Jets offense that I expect to bounce back in a huge way. Again, going from Trevor Siemian and Zach Wilson to Aaron Rodgers is just a humongous difference. Now, Garrett Wilson last season was a bust. It wasn't a slight bust. It was a bust of large magnitude, like the Hall of Fame bust for Peyton Manning in the Hall of Fame in Canton, because that dude's forehead is absolutely humongous. Wide receiver 26 in PPR last season. Based upon where you drafted him, he kind of flushed that pick down the toilet. Wide receiver 33 in PPR points per game. 17 games played, he was 4th in targets with 168, 9.9 per game. He had 95 receptions, 5.6 per game, 13th. But only 1,042 receiving yards, 61.3 per game, 22nd. And only 3 total touchdowns, 58th. Despite ranking 11th in total route wins, he was 76th in target accuracy. Garrett Wilson is an amazing wide receiver. This guy was an amazing prospect coming out of college, and while he hasn't put together an amazing season yet at the NFL level, I believe this season Aaron Rodgers is going to fully unlock Garrett Wilson, and with the injury to Puka Nacua, I think you could definitely now, based on all reports, Puka Nacua is currently considered week to week after suffering a knee injury, so I don't think it is DEFCON 5, which I think is the worst one. Maybe DEFCON 1 is the worst one, right? But it's not full-on Mayday, wee-woo, wee-woo. You need to start full-on panicking, but anytime you hear about an injury in early August, as we're kind of knocking on the door, I am the one who knocks right on the season, it starts to make me a little bit more nervous with those players, and it could result in me ranking Garrett Wilson over Puka Nacua. I was someone that was a little bit more pessimistic on Garrett Wilson, but everything that I've seen from the beat reporters tells me that I need to be a lot more confident, and I am now fully in the camp that believes Garrett Wilson could have a huge season. At number 2, we got Cooper Kupp, wide receiver of the LA Rams. Aggregate ADP wide receiver 22 at pick 42. Underdog Fantasy ADP wide receiver 19 at pick 26.1. The injury to Puka Nacua is one of the factors that leads me to get even higher on Cooper Kupp. Now, if you've been watching my videos throughout the summer, I have whipped out the knee pads to talk about Cooper Kupp multiple times. Cooper Kupp is a guy that struggled last season because he missed the first 4 games with a hamstring strain. And if you drafted him prior to that injury and you took him very early in the first round, you felt like a Muppet because there was a fist stuck directly up your ass. But if you were able to get him later, and once you actually put into perspective the situation, he wasn't really all that bad. But now you have Puka Nacua considered week to week after suffering a knee injury last weekend. Now it's described as not serious, but it is certainly something to monitor. You add that with the fact that Cooper Kupp is fully healthy, and there are reports that Cooper Kupp is taking command of this offense, that he is the captain now, and he could end up out targeting Puka Nacua, who you were going to have to draft inside of the first round or the early second round, whereas Cooper Kupp, you can get him sometimes in the 4th round, sometimes in the 3rd round. Now, Cooper Kupp last season, again, it was a doozy because of the injury. When you suffer a hamstring strain in the summer, that is going to heavily impact your output on the season when you are a skill position player like Cooper Kupp. Despite that, he played in 12 games, finishing as a top 24 wide receiver in PPR points per game. He had 95 targets, 7.9 per game, 59 receptions, 4.9 per game, 737 receiving yards, 61.4 per game, and 5 total touchdowns, 29th at wide receiver. Again, despite coming off the injury, he was still relatively efficient. 19th in route win rate, 21st in target separation, 13th in true catch rate, and 22nd in fantasy points per route. Cooper Kupp is incredibly underrated this year because of the fact that he burned fantasy football players last season, and fantasy football players love to hold grudges. So don't hold your grudge and draft Cooper Kupp in the 3rd or the 4th round. The upside for him is immense. Wide receiver 22 off the board. Wouldn't be shocked at all if Puka plays the whole season, if Cooper Kupp is a reliable top 14 guy, and there's upside weekly of him having a huge top 5 game. Moving to player number 3, we got Rashee Rice, wide receiver of the Kansas City Chiefs. Aggregate ADP wide receiver 34 at pick 71. Underdog Fantasy ADP wide receiver 34 at pick 56.8. When I sat down to think about players that I wanted to move up in my rankings, looking at ADP, when I saw the name Rashee Rice, I had an epiphany. It cost me 50 at Tiffany's. Shout out to Tiffany, Stephanie, right? I had this realization that Rashee Rice is being ranked as if he is going to serve a pretty lengthy suspension, right? Wide receiver 34 tells you that he is going to miss multiple games, because why else would he be ranked as the wide receiver number 34 based upon current ADP if he was going to be playing every single game? But I've started to sense a trend, and that is that Rashee Rice is moving up and up draft boards because the chance that there is no suspension in 2024 continues to feel larger and larger, like your cock off some Viagra, after we have gotten now into August, right? I thought, hey, maybe they'll end up suspending him in July. Then it doesn't happen. And as of right now, with the fact being that his court date on his driving incident isn't until December 9th of 2024, and with how the NFL normally operates when it comes to things like this, where they kind of let the legal process play out before they swing down a suspension, could be pretty likely that Rashee Rice plays the whole season without a suspension. Now, the worst case scenario is December 9th. They decide to, instead of pushing things off, which I think is more likely to happen, where even if the NFL tries to give him a suspension, they're like, hey, we're going to go ahead and try to negotiate this, right? It gets pushed all the way up until next season. So I think there's a very likely scenario where Rashee Rice, if healthy, plays the whole entire season. Now, I understand they bring in Hollywood Brown of the former Arizona Cardinals, formerly of the Baltimore Ravens, and I get they draft Xavier Worthy, the fastest fucking man alive, the one-trick pony himself. But Rashee Rice was really starting to feel like a clear number one receiver at the NFL level. In his rookie season, 16 games played with 8 starts, he was the wide receiver 29 in PPR points per game. 102 targets, 6.4 per game, ranking 33rd. 79 receptions, 4.9 per game, 18th. 938 receiving yards, 58.6 per game, 28th. 7 total touchdowns, 18th. In terms of efficiency, this is where we really saw just how good Rashee Rice is. Second in target accuracy, which I guess really isn't why he's so good. It just shows that Patrick Mahomes is fucking amazing. Third in target separation, 10th in yards per route run, 7th in fantasy points per route run, and 16th in route win rate. But if you look even further, you whip out the microscope into last season, you will see that towards the end of last season, when the team fully commit to Rashee Rice, is where the success really began to happen. Now, early on in the season, he had a couple 10-plus point performances. He even had a 17-point game up against the Chargers in Week 7. But from Weeks 12 on is when we saw Rashee Rice fucking fly away and sprout like a beautiful butterfly, right? 24 points up against the Raiders. 14 points up against the Packers. Then 18 against the Bills. 24 against the Patriots. 11 against the Raiders. And then 17.7 up against the Cincinnati Bengals. And the train didn't come to a stop in the playoffs. Up against my Miami Dolphins, he hit us with the 619 Rey Mysterio. 27 fantasy points followed by 8, 12, and 10. Having 8 receptions in 2 of those playoff games and having not 8 or more targets in 3 out of 4 games. Now, I understand the addition of Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy throws a wrench into things, but where Rashee Rice is being drafted, even with Xavier Worthy and Hollywood Brown being there, with Travis Kelce, Isaiah Pacheco, he is being drafted in a range where this guy is your flex option, maybe even your wide receiver 4. This is a guy that has incredible upside weekly due to the offense that he is in. And I believe while there is definitely more risk than there would be if Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy were magically on a different team, the upside outweighs the negatives. And again, with it seeming like they're not going to end up suspending him, Rashee Rice is going to be a guy that continues to crawl up my rankings. Next up, we move to player number 4, and that is Brock Bowers, tight end of the Las Vegas Raiders. Underdog ADP, tight end 10 at pick 96.6. Aggregate ADP, tight end 9 at pick 78. He was the 13th overall pick in the 2024 NFL Draft. 2023 season at Georgia as a 20-year-old. He missed 4 games last season, 2 of which came after he undergoing, I guess would be the correct term there. Tightrope surgery, like he's going over Niagara Falls last season, which is used to stabilize an ankle injury. So he suffered an ankle injury, missed 2 games, then got the surgery, missed 2 games after that. 56 receptions on 73 targets for 713 yards, 12.7 yards per reception, and 6 total touchdowns, leading Georgia in catches, receiving yards, and touchdowns, which is actually the normal for Brock Bowers because the motherfucker did it every single year at Georgia. Bowers is also the first ever tight end to win the Mackey Award not once, but twice, which is given to the best tight end in college. I would argue back in the day, Abella Danger had the best tight end in college, if you've ever seen that video. But reports from a few years ago is what we really need to be talking about here, right? From a few days ago, I think I might have said a few years ago, but a report from a few days ago was that when the Raiders are in 12 personnel, is 2 tight end sets, Bayer is typically lined up at the Y, which is the letter designated for the traditional tight end, while Bowers is usually the F, which is essentially a slot wide receiver who moves around field, which means that in 2 tight end sets, you are going to be seeing Bauer catch a bunch of easy passes this season. We're going to see him be able to get those easy receptions, which is going to boost his value weekly. And with the fact that I have been seeing so many reporters, all the beat reporters, blowing on Bowers like he was on fire, makes me want to move him up my rankings. Now, previously, I'm going to be honest, I wasn't really interested in Brock Bowers. There was a lot of reports that he struggled with blocking, this, that, and the other thing, and maybe he would struggle to see the field in his rookie year, but it seems like a lot of that malarkey has been diminished recently. Now, just the ideology of drafting a rookie tight end to some might just instantly be a no. You look at him, you're like, oh, this guy was amazing in college, but he's a rookie tight end, so I can't do it, which I understand, but we've seen rookie tight ends finish very well. If you remember Evan Ingram a couple of years ago with the Giants, Brock Bowers is certainly a guy that could break the mold and be great at the tight end position in his rookie year. He also has going against him the fact that the Raiders love to run the ball, but if Brock Bowers is as involved as I think he could be, he could still be a league winner going off the board as the tight end number 9. At number 5, we move to Zack Moss, running back of the Cincinnati Bengals, aggregate ADP running back 30 at pick 94, underdog fantasy ADP running back 28 at pick 98.7. Light FM. Zack Moss was listed as the running back 1 on the team's depth chart that was released yesterday. Now, I want to be very clear that the team depth chart released is not something that you need to hold on to like, oh, the team depth chart tells you that Zack Moss is the running back 1. That means that Zack Moss is clearly going to be the running back 1 to start the season, or this means this player is going to be this. If you remember going into last season, Baker Mayfield and the scrub backup that the Buccaneers have were listed as the co-starters as the starting quarterback of the Buccaneers, and we saw how that went. Baker was playing amazing, and that other dude was holding his fucking Gatorade, okay? So don't read too much into it, just something I'm noting. I still do like Chase Brown at ADP and wouldn't be surprised as the season goes along if he plays a bigger role. But I do believe in week number 1, Zack Moss will be the guy seeing a majority of the touches. In 6 games last season, when Zack Moss played above 50% of the snaps in Indianapolis, he averaged 20.2 carries per game. I understand they're going to reel that one back, right? It's not going to be 20.2 fucking carries per game on the Cincinnati Bengals. I understand that. 87 rushing yards, 4.3 yards per carry. That's solid. 0.5 touchdowns per game, and he was averaging 16.4 PPR points per game, which would have ranked 7th amongst running backs on the season. In 4 of 6 of those games, he received 3 or more targets and had multiple top 12 performances over that stretch. Now, am I someone that is going to sit here and tell you that Zack Moss is the next Joe Mixon from Joe Mixon's time being the franchise guy of the Bengals, metaphorically, right? Or when when Joe Mixon was in his prime? No, I don't think Zack Moss was as good as prime Joe Mixon. But I don't think he needs to be, which was seen last season when not so prime Joe Mixon finished as a top 12 running back in this offense, with his backup being Chase Brown. Now, we've seen the beat reporters talk up Chase Brown, but the team still believes that Zack Moss is the number 1 guy. Again, at ADP, I like both of them, but I think Zack Moss has the inside edge to finish inside of the top 24 at the running back position. If Joe Burrow is able to stay healthy, with Jamar Chase, with Tee Higgins, with the rookie receivers that they drafted, with Mike Licky as the tight end, this is an offense that is going to be able to score a bunch of points week in and week out, have that upside to score 40 plus points in any given game. And I believe at ADP, Zack Moss could pay dividends. Again, if I don't get Zack Moss, I'm definitely interested in drafting Chase Brown. But I think week 1, early on, if Zack Moss is able to fend off Chase Brown might end up being a bad pick, but again, bad pick when you're going at pick 120 or pick 100 plus. It doesn't fucking really matter, right? Because the later you get into the draft, the more risks you want to take. And I think that Zach Moss is a very educated risk at pick 94. Again, in Indianapolis, he looked really good. That is a great run scheme. But the run scheme in Cincinnati appears to not be all that bad as well. Final guy on the rise is going to be JSN, Jaxon Smith-Njigba. The more I look into JSN, now I was already all in on Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I am even further in the more and more I dive into this situation in Seattle. JSN, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, wide receiver of the Seattle Seahawks. Aggregate ADP wide receiver 45 at pick 99. Underdog Fantasy ADP wide receiver 44 at pick 76.2. If you guys are new to Underdog Fantasy, they are the sponsor of today's video. If you use promo code Notorious, you will receive a special pick plus up to $250 if you're a first-time depositor using promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description. Underdog Fantasy is the best place to play best ball this summer. If you don't know what best ball fantasy football is, it's the best part about fantasy football. It's the draft. You do your draft, and that's it. There's no waivers, no trades, no in-season management at the end of every single week. Underdog will automatically put the highest scores into your lineup for you. Their main tournament, $25 to enter. Best Ball Mania 5, $1.5 million to first place. They're also going to be tournaments with higher entries and lower entries. If you want to practice for your 2024 fantasy football draft, a good place to do it is on Underdog Fantasy, link in the video description. So the most recent report on Jaxon Smith-Njigba from head coach Mike McDonald, How to Farm, EIEIO, said that JSN has got this fluid explosiveness about him. He can run the entire route tree, incredible ways to track the ball, body control, explosive in and out of his cuts, the mentality of what we want. He has that. Nice, right? That sounds very, very good. JSN also mentioned yesterday that offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb's offense has a lot of potential for explosive play. So explosiveness being taught by this offensive playbook that they really like. And it was mentioned by JSN, and now it is mentioned by Mike McDonald. This is very good because last season we saw when they utilized the explosive plays and actually threw the fucking ball to JSN that he was able to have a huge game up against the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I understand that JSN is probably not going to be sitting atop the Iron Throne, Daenerys Targaryen style, or King Aegon style, as the wide receiver one in terms of targets in this offense, right? Unless DK Metcalf gets hurt, knock on wood, we don't root for injuries. That is very unlikely to happen. But what is likely to happen is that Njigba slots in as the number 2 guy ahead of Lockett. Again, going from the old regime to this new regime could prove to be incredibly positive for JSN, who was certainly a bust last season. Now, he wasn't this crazy bust, like just an eruption from Mount Vesuvius because of where he was coming off the board, but you were still definitely disappointed because of how great he looked at college and because of how much people were really talking him up last season. He ended up as the wide receiver 47 in PPR and the wide receiver 59 in PPR points per game. He played in 17 games. He had 93 targets, 63 receptions, 628 receiving yards, and 4 total touchdowns, but there were some promising, bright spots, right? Especially that game up against the Dallas Cowboys in prime time. 6th in target separation, 17th in route win rate. JSN can clearly play ball. You can watch it in college. You can watch it at multiple points last season. It's all about Geno Smith having a better season and the offense being more cultivated towards getting the ball to JSN. Because last season, it almost seemed like an afterthought, right? You would see JSN butt booty naked, wide open, right? He has the defender in shambles. The guy is on the ground like a crime scene with the chalk fucking traced around him. He's on the ground. JSN's wide open, and the ball is being checked down to the turf right in front of Geno, right? Or the ball goes to Tyler Lockett in my pocket, who has 4 men circling him, right? So as long as JSN is maybe the first look more times, or just a guy that Geno Smith actually fucking looks at, right? And Geno Smith doesn't play like Deadpool's fucking roommate who was blind, right? Because Geno Smith looked blind, Stevie Wonder style last season. I think JSN is a guy with significant upside. And as you get deeper into the draft, you want to be taking swings with high upside. And I think that's exactly what JSN has. So I'm going to keep creeping him up my rankings. Thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. The rankings are going to be out very, very shortly on Patreon. I'm trying to make sure that they look as good as possible. So you can check out the Patreon link in the video description. If you guys have any questions, leave them down below in the comments. Check out one of the videos on your screen. If you haven't seen them already, hit that subscribe button down below if you're new. Whether you are new to the channel or not, make sure to leave a like on today's video. Love you guys all so much. I hope you have a great guys' day. And I will see you guys tomorrow with another banger of a video. Love you guys as always. Good boy.